I know that some in our audience know the finer points of hockey.
The Chris Johnston Show.
We are your friends.
The biggest stories, bringing you inside the game.
What did you hear?
The Chris Johnston Show. Powered by Sports Interaction. Wanna bet?
What is going on?
Here's Chris with your host, Julian McKenzie.
Part of the game.
Big Money Siege, we have entered the final week of the regular season, and there's still so much to play for with all the different divisions and also the wild card spots, notably in the Western Conference, where I will be, checking out the Calgary Flames, playing for their playoff lives. Siege, first off, how's your weekend? And two, what do you think of all this madness?
More importantly, what's the vibe check in Calgary right now? Can't be too smooth at the moment.
Oh, it's nervous energy. Nervous energy. I fully expect, and I'm happy to be wrong, I fully expect to go to the Saddle Dome tonight. They are playing the Nashville Predators and just feel this nervous energy. Like what I would normally I expect crowds to be like super loud and super amped and super into what's going on. But it feels like the last few home games I've been at, there's just been too many moments where it feels like a library, which the Saddle Dome has unfortunately earned that reputation at times.
Well, I mean, look at the product on the ice. I mean, these things are inextricably linked. When you give fans reason to be excited and get out of their seats, usually those are loud buildings. But I think there's a lot of questions about this team and people wondering how it's going to go. And I mean, basically they can't lose on Monday, right? Mathematically, I suppose there's still a way they could get in, but you need all kinds of help if you're not putting 2 points in the bank on Monday night. And so it'd be interesting to see how that game goes. Nashville's kind of hung around, although they lost the game Sunday in this playoff race. But it's such a big moment for Calgary to have a home game head-to-head against one of the teams that they can kind of put out and try to vault themselves over the Winnipeg Jets.
Seriously, it is the moment. It is the time for them to put up or shut up. And maybe this sounds like a cliche, but if they win today, and even if they win Wednesday, they still need a bit of help. But there's still this like very thin opportunity remaining for them to make something of what this year has been. And I don't know, like I felt like there's something about that Chicago loss they had last week. I think if they had won that game, then they go into Winnipeg, I think spirits are a lot more positive. There's more reason to feel optimistic. But the fact that the Flames found a way to lose that Chicago game, I think that changes everything with how fans feel about this team. There are people
they lost 3 games to Chicago this year, right?
They lost all of their games to Chicago this year, and they're about to play a Nashville Predators team who they have not picked up a win against all year.
Right. I mean, head-to-head matchups sometimes, like it's.
Sorry, I had to draw my blinds.
It's like, what's going on?
Sometimes stupid glare. Go ahead.
We make too much of them because, certain teams, when you get them, maybe you're playing back-to-back and they're rested. And like throughout a season, there's like a lot of dynamics that don't just get captured. But it just feels like to lose to a team right at the very bottom of the NHL standings 3 times and where you're either going to make or miss the playoffs here by 1 or 2 points on either side, right? I mean, that's what this season is going to be for Calgary. So it's hard not to look back at all the places you could have got extra points. I mean, the other thing that just jumps out, man, you cover this team and watch them much more than I do, of course, is that 16 number in the overtime and shootout loss column. Like, it's crazy. Like, you could go back through all those 16 games. If like you win 2 more, it looks different anyway. This is everything's on the line. I kind of like that they control their destiny to a point, and that if they win tonight and get 2 points, they're still alive 100%. And then they get another game Wednesday. And if they win that one, obviously ultimately they're going to need someone to lose, but I want to see them take care of their business first. Cause it just feels like every time they've had a chance at prosperity, the Flames have let it fall through their hands. And remember, this was a team, that entered this year with so much hype around them. They had a big summer, a lot of splashy moves. I think a lot of us thought they were actually potentially better built for a playoff run. And now the conversation shifted obviously over these last 6 months pretty dramatically.
Yeah, it's kind of funny that the Flames and the Jets are in this conversation because it feels as if the team that misses the playoffs between those two, they're due for some kind of shakeup in the off season. Like if the Jets, by the way, they need 3 points in the final 3 games to make the playoffs.
They both have huge questions whether they make or miss. Like I actually don't think it changes that much. I mean, it changes the way you feel. The owner's a little happier if he's, been able to have some home games and all that kind of stuff. But I mean, even if one of these teams wins a Stanley Cup, like somehow gets in by a point and goes and wins the cup, I mean, there's still big contractual type of decisions or, shape of the franchise type of decisions in both of those cities.
Absolutely. Like there's no guarantee, for example, in Calgary that Brad Treliving is coming back. Like they still have to go through their contract negotiations and all that. But like I sit here before you today as someone who is not sure if that is going to happen, even if they make the playoffs. I do not know. And I'm not trying to be all like, like alarmist or anything. Like we do not know. We have
he doesn't have
idea.
A contract. You're
correct.
It's not alarmist. It's what, April 10th?
Yep.
Like as of June 30th, he's free to go, as of that night or under July 1st, he can go work anywhere he wants. It's the same as Kyle Dubas in Toronto. So like it's when you get down to this point, of course, both might not be back just even under their own choosing. It's not just because their team might not want them back. When you get this close to free agency, I'd say this for any of the players. There's players in all kinds of cities right now. If they don't have a contract and you get this far down the road, I mean, most of them are probably going to test free agency. No, the GM chair is so unique, and it's not like there's 10 teams going to be looking for a new GM this summer. But yeah, it's a strange time, and then obviously it just hasn't gone well with Daryl Sutter. He's already got a contract extension, but I just think that there's big questions to be faced there in Winnipeg. We've all kind of wondered, do they start breaking apart the core, or how do they treat this? With Mark Scheifele, Connor Hellebuck, Pierre-Luc Dubois, they can all be unrestricted free agents next summer. Do they preemptively make some kind of decisions or moves, or do they, even those moves could be an extension, right? You're able to sign a player to an extension a year out. So, I mean, they just have big decisions pending. All those things get put to the side at this stage of the season, but you're right. It won't be long. Like the season will end for one of these teams in a couple days, and then all of a sudden those questions will be very pertinent.
What about Kevin Cheveldayoff in Winnipeg?
I have no reason to believe he's at the end of his time. I think that we have to remember the Jets do business different than a lot of teams. I think that they value continuity and loyalty and all those sorts of things. They've only had a couple head coaches in their entire franchise history. Kevin Cheveldayoff's been the only general manager. So, I haven't heard anything anyway about his situation being in any sort of jeopardy. But certainly he's a key figure in all this, because maybe it's Winnipeg where they're asking those pertinent questions about all those players. And, he and his staff are going to have to make some tough calls, I think, this summer, again, one way or the other, whether they get in and have a long playoff run or whether their season ends by Friday.
Do you have I don't think I asked you which 2 teams last week would be going in on the wild card on the Western side. Right now, since there's only one spot, are you picking between Winnipeg, the Jets, the Flames, or do you think the Predators sneak in that final wild card spot in the West?
To be honest, had you asked me last week, I was thinking the Predators were going to get in. I'm feeling a little less confident after they lost a big game. But UC Saros had been playing so well, and it seemed like a lot of people outside of Nashville, of course, were overlooking the fact that they had games in hand and they had the ability to kind of control their destiny. I think it's going to be Winnipeg ultimately. The math being in their favor. They have a 1-point lead on Calgary, and they have 3 games to play, and Calgary's only got 2 to play. So they've got the opportunity to truly control their destiny. As for the other team, Seattle could jump LA still, which is like not something I've seen pointed out, but maybe LA ends up as a wild card team. I mean, the cool thing about the West because we don't even know who's getting in, but then also the matchups themselves are quite fluid. And so it's hard to know who the teams at the top of the conference are going to play, whether it's Edmonton or Colorado. I mean, we're going to see some jockeying here in these final few days before we know what's happening out West, which is a little different than in the East. In the East, we don't know who's getting the wild card spots, but otherwise the matchups are kind of falling into place a little bit more clearly.
Yeah, in the West, the sooner they figure that all out, the better for me. In the Eastern Conference, we should mention...
Not all about you, Julian.
It's not all about me, but I would like to know, and I think that's all right. Anyway, the Eastern Conference, Florida and the Islanders tied at 91 points in a wildcard spot, and then Pittsburgh a point behind. Still holding on to hope. All three of those teams have played 80 games so far. What do you make of what's going on?
How about the Lion King, man? How about the Lion King?
You really are big into Alex Lyon, man. That's your dog.
Well, he's a 30-year-old goaltender. He had 7 career NHL wins before the season, and he's won 6 games in a row, and all of them have kind of been must-win when you look at where Florida is in the playoffs. I mean, it's such a great story developing, and good for the Panthers in a way for just rolling with him, because he was kind of a fill-in goaltender. I mean, the first win on this streak that they've had actually came in Toronto, so I just happened to be there that day, and I was surprised he was starting in net a little bit. And look what's happened. So, I think that there's a bit of folk hero kind of action happening there. It's sort of like the Hamburglar back in the day in Ottawa, goalie Andrew Hammond, who didn't really have much of a track record and won all these games in a row for the Senators, got hot at the right time. And so Alex Lyon, I mean, if Florida gets in, which is, again, they control their own destiny. If they win their last 2 games, they're in. They can actually clinch on Monday if they get 2 points and Pittsburgh drops a point. So they could clinch even a little bit early here. And who would have thought that it's a bit of a journeyman 30-year-old goaltender, played an NCAA career, was in Philadelphia system a bit with Carolina, and now he's winning the big games for Florida and threatening to end Pittsburgh's long playoff run too.
Who's a bigger contributor to Florida's late season resurgence? Alex Lyon or Keith Tkachuk calling the team soft?
Ooh, I'm going to say Alex Lyon because he's actually having to be in there stopping the bullets. But it's interesting how that all worked out with Keith Tkachuk. And I think I mentioned this before, but there's some thought that part of what can ail a team like Florida is not having kind of some of those walls they have to push down. They don't get the media frenzies as much, and so they certainly haven't been soft here this last little stretch. To win 6 in a row at this stage of the season, given how perilous it was looking, right? I think they lost 4 in a row before the winning 6 in a row, so it was the right time of year to have their longest stretch of the season. And this is good news for them, not so good news for the Montreal Canadiens, who own Florida's first round draft pick this year, and we're hoping that would be a lottery pick. It's looking less and less likely that's going to happen.
One last thing before we bring on David Bastel for Sports Interaction. Let's talk about one of the 2 other teams fighting for that Eastern wildcard spot, but not off of, hey, how are their chances? Bo Horvat said some very interesting comments over the weekend when asked about his performance after a recent Islanders game. And the quote going around, "It's a lot better than Vancouver. I'll tell you that for free." I would love to know how you feel about Bo Horvat saying what he said and everyone getting up in arms about that, and just your general thoughts on that.
Well, he said it in arena, so it was right after the game.
Yes.
And my guess is he was feeling the emotions of the night, and probably one of those things I'm sure he would like to have back, because even if he has that kind of feeling about Vancouver, even if there's some bitterness with the way his time ended there or with the organization, which I think, quite frankly, isn't unjustified entirely, but you don't want to be airing that publicly. I bet if we asked him today, it's 2 days later, he'd probably be like, yeah, I said the quiet part out loud. But for me, it just adds a little spice. I mean, what's the scene going to be like when he goes back to Vancouver now? It would have been totally different, right? This guy was seen a little bit as kind of a martyr, maybe. He was the team captain. He'd been a good soldier. The organization, didn't really step up to sign him last summer. He'd been a model citizen on some bad Canucks teams and never complained, just went about his business. Had a great year this year. But now he might have turned himself with one comment into a bit more of someone the fans are booing. And I don't know how. I mean, Vancouver's such a unique situation. I don't know how the fans feel, because a lot of that fan base kind of doesn't like the organization. It feels like, right? It feels like they direct a lot of anger already towards the leadership of the team and frankly the ownership of the team. And so I don't know if they'll see that comment from Bo as a shot at them, or if they'll see him kind of on their side. That it's a pretty spicy meatball to drop. And we had a few of those on the weekend. I don't know if you saw, there's a quote as well from Chris Weidman of the Montreal Canadiens, who didn't like that the Leafs put in Jed Alexander for the last minute 10 of a game, university goaltender. And he kind of said something along the lines of, they're going to get what's coming to them in a couple weeks. Like, it's getting to the end of the year. Everyone's, maybe a little bit on edge, and we're getting the honest quotes. Keep them coming.
I was about to say, like, that. So those two things happened, and then like in the NBA, it felt like everyone was trying to get at each other. Like this Easter weekend felt particularly combative for some reason.
Yeah, well, I do think in the NHL, like I haven't been watching NBA closely, if I'm being honest, but I think it is just getting to the end of the year. Like it's been a long year in Montreal, right?
Yeah,
they've lost a lot of games. Like I can understand why someone in Chris Weidman's shoes just might be feeling frustrated with where things are at, and you get down to the end. Again, we have to remember not everything's planned. Like sometimes I have never been on the other side of the microphone. I haven't really been interviewed, maybe the odd podcast here or there or something, but like in general. But I can just imagine maybe it's sort of like a last day of school feel, and everyone's like letting their guard down a bit, and as I say, keep it coming. We'll take more of this. I don't know that it's pretty harmless in the big picture, even though people get pretty fired up on Twitter.
Then what's the last day of school equivalent of putting in a U Sports goaltender in the final seconds of a blowout game? It seemed like a lot of people got upset about that too. I don't get why people would get. No, I think it's ridiculous too. Like it's clear that this guy, like the game was well out of reach for the Canadiens to get. It's a cool opportunity for this E-bug to step in and play a couple seconds and say he got to play in the NHL. Why is everyone freaking out about, like, I don't like the discourse that's going on about that story.
Yeah, that's insane to me. Like, if you don't just see that as the Leafs giving a nice moment to a 23-year-old who called it, a dream come true afterwards, like, to me, they weren't rubbing anyone's nose in anything. Like, I guess you don't like that if you're on the Canadian side. Well, it's like, well, don't lose 7-1. Like, don't put the Leafs in a position where they have that free minute 10 where they could have put you or I in, Julian, and they still would have won the game. Like it sucks to suck, right? Like I can't believe anyone would be mad about that. Again, I don't mind if Chris Weidman, like, I think athletes got to find a chip on their shoulder. They got to find their fuel wherever they can find it. Like I don't mind him being mad, but like anyone who's a neutral here, and I'll call us neutrals on this one, like just literally, I don't know how you could view that. Like Edmonton did the same thing this year, right?
That's exactly what I was going to point out too. We're a couple months out from that happening.
Right. And I'm pretty sure everyone kind of celebrated that move. It was cool. Like the guy got in and he made a save. Like it's a neat moment. I see it kind of as team bonding, team building. And if it was a 4-3 game, either way, the Leafs, I guarantee you, wouldn't have done that. So, Chris Weidman and his teammates had an opportunity to not be down 7-1 and give Toronto the license to kind of do whatever they wanted at the end of that night.
I like this start to the podcast today. We get it on some playoff talk. We get it on some chatter here and around the league. We still have sports interaction to come. We still have Matthew Knies talk to come. And it's Monday, so we've got questions coming in. I've got a mea culpa
too, but we'll do it on the other side of DB.
Ooh, all right, cool. So we will get to that on the other side of DB, as you just said.
You can bet that with David Bastel. Brought to you by Sports Interaction. Get in the action and make a play. 19 plus. Please play responsibly.
Welcome to You Can Bet That with David Bastel. Remember to hit up sportsinteraction.com/STPN for all of your gaming needs. We should be talking about hockey, but tomorrow is opening day for the Toronto Blue Jays, sir. We're excited. We are excited over here.
It's totally, you're absolutely right, because we're winding up the NHL season. I'm gearing up for postseason like you guys are, because I know that's going to be a lot of fun, especially at first round. But it's also opening day in Toronto on Tuesday, and that's a pretty big deal in the city and across most of the nation, just because it is that the return of the boys this summer that kind of melted down last year, if you remember, Seattle Mariners.
Whoa. There are some people who are going to be very upset at what you just said. Jeez.
I was at that game, Julian. It was terrible. It was I was sitting beside Ernie
Sure, don't
Witt.
seem all that broken up about it.
I'm like, hey, you know what? It's the Tigers. That's the good news, guys. The Jays are heavy favorites in this one, and I like them for a variety of reasons. Not just because they should roll over a Tigers team that's last place in the Central, but a lot of good props at Sports Interaction now for home runs. I'm circling Matt Chapman because this guy's red hot right now, almost hitting 500. He's paying about 5-1 CJ to hit a home run. There's going to be dingers because you've been to this dome more than I have. This is dinger friendly. And you're playing against the Tigers, which also means dinger friendly. So a lot of these things add up. I'm expecting big things, not only for this game, but for this season.
Well, and they've changed the alterations of the outfield, and so it's even a little more homer friendly. So hopefully it's a great opening game there for them. And yeah, I'm optimistic on this team, despite the way last season ended and that you horribly have brought me back to mentally. Given that a 10-game road trip to start the season, I think 6-4 is pretty solid.
Yep.
I think it's going to be a great year for the Jays, and so they got to get it off right. They're winning Tuesday night, and lots of poutine hot dogs will be consumed.
DB, are where do you stand on the poutine hot dog debate?
You know what? I'm willing to try because I'm a massive fan of hot dogs. I'm a massive fan of poutine. Mix them together. I mean, friends should be able to do the old Hogan Savage WrestleMania match, where they're friends, but then I tend to remember that they fought at the end, but we won't get into that right now. But yes, I'm on board for the hot dog and a lot of other delicious treats, which you can only find at arenas and stadiums throughout North America.
Okay, well, here's to hoping your intestines don't make like the New World Order and start fighting each other.
Whoa!
Hey.
You're putting down what I'm throwing. I like it.
Hey, wrestling references on the CJ Show. Don't forget to check out sportsinteraction.com/SDPN for all the best odds before game, in game, and the best props. sportsinteraction.com/SDPN. DB, we'll talk to you soon.
For life.
Siege, you mentioned you had a mea culpa to do. Do you want to get started with that before we get on to everything else?
Yes, I'll go right into my DMs for this one. And
you
might recall the last show, I showed up with the Juggernaut t-shirt.
You did, yes.
We were having our playful banter and being goofy.
Yeah.
And I guess that I mentioned that on that episode that I hadn't used a Juggernaut word related to a team this season. And Risto Pakarinen, who's a friend of mine, he lives in Sweden, he's written books but he's covered international hockey over the years and listens to every one of our shows this morning, sent me a quote. These Bruins are a steamroller, a force, a juggernaut. And that was from my March 6th Inside the NHL newsletter. So I didn't remember having done that. Honestly, it slipped my mind that I had done that. But Risto's keeping me honest here. He said he's 100%er, meaning he follows everything that I'm saying and writing. And he said, we study every podcast episode, every newsletter, every tweet. So he's keeping me honest here. So sorry to those that was not intentionally lying. It just had slipped my memory. I had written that.
It slipped my memory too. I didn't realize you had said that. I forgot.
I know. Well, I mean, I guess I'm comfortable enough. Look, the Bruins, they've won 63 games now, right? They sit atop the all-time standings. So, I mean, that's not at least a hot take. I wrote that a month ago, but clearly they're on a special year. Pasternak gets to 60 goals. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen in the playoffs, but I'm comfortable saying this is as good of a regular season team as we've seen in a long time. I mean, maybe Tampa from 4 years ago is the closest equivalent in recent memory, but I mean, the Bruins, all they do is win. So yeah, I've called them a juggernaut, but not with any intent to sway what happens in the world. I have nothing but respect for how they do their business.
And they might still, here's the thing, for people who forget, the very first time CJ used that word, or at least the first time that's documented, he used it about the Montreal Canadiens, who ended up going to the final that year. Like, it's not that bad of a word.
It was a journey, though. Like, they ended up firing Claude Julien 3 weeks after I tweeted it. Like, they immediately went into a nosedive after I tweeted it. And keep in mind, I was tweeting it. I actually thought they were a juggernaut, right? Like, I was just watching.
They looked really good. They did.
It was the year of the Canadian all Canadian division in the COVID years, and I was seeing lots of their games because the teams are all playing each other, and I was covering the Leafs primarily at that time in my job. And so I called them a juggernaut in a tweet, and it for whatever reason, it caught wildfire. And you're right. They ended up in the Stanley Cup final that year. So I don't know why it's viewed as a curse.
Anyway, where'd you get that juggernaut shirt, by the way?
I had it made. It's when I ran a marathon.
Yes, that's true.
And I did it to raise some money during the COVID year. And actually I did it in response to that tweet. And I was showing like, you can't jinx anything. Like I'll even go run 42.2 kilometers with this shirt on, proving I can't jinx anything with the juggernaut. But yeah. And it's funny, that day I actually wasn't trying to be a goof. I literally went into my drawer and I was like looking for a shirt, and I grabbed it and I just like laughed. I hadn't seen it. It was like in the bottom of my drawer and I hadn't seen it in a while. And I was like, I'm just going to wear this on the pod today. Anyway.
Yeah, it was a great shirt to wear though. But thank you, Risto, for fact checking. Also, 100%ers. Is that a nickname we want to use going forward for our CJ show listeners?
I'm okay with that. I mean, Risto doesn't, he walks his dog. He never misses a pod. Like, honestly, he'll just come in my DMs like a day later, and it's like he was part of a conversation you and I had, and he wants to put in his 2 cents. Like like whatever we were on about, he's got some ideas. He's out walking his dog Luffy, and yeah, 100%ers. So he would be one. Coburg Papa would be one. I don't know how many other 100%ers there are. I mean, we do a lot of shows, man.
Hey, man. Well, Risto, we appreciate you. Thank you. And I just want to stick with the Bruins for a second here. I was just curious. Which of these milestones that have happened over the last few days, which of these milestones impresses you the most? Is it the Bruins breaking the single season record for wins? Is it Connor McDavid getting over 150 points in a season? Is it Sidney Crosby reaching the 1,500 point plateau? I get there's 2 individual players in a team here, but they're all incredible milestones all the same. I'm just curious which one you're most impressed by.
It's got to be McDavid 150 for me. That's tough because you're asking about a career-long achievement like Crosby's. Mm-hmm. There's a team achievement in the Bruins for a season, and then an individual achievement for a season. But I think the fact that it's very likely, I mean, I don't know how many of the remaining games McDavid's going to play, but he could get to 155 points. And at that point, then you have only Gretzky, Lemieux, and McDavid who've ever reached that total in a year. And whenever you're doing anything where you say offensively that the only other 2 players ever in history have done it are Gretzky and Lemieux, I mean, this is the Mount Rushmore season for him. And this is I'm not throwing any shade at the Bruins, but as much as I'm saying this is the best regular season I can remember, Tampa won 62 games only 4 years ago. So it's not beyond comprehension. Now it's still a ridiculous record. And I'm honestly not taking anything away from it, but McDavid's doing something once in a generation. I think we can all recognize with all the changes over the years with now 3-on-3 overtime and shootouts. And like, it's hard to compare these Bruins to like the late 70s Canadiens teams. And just in terms of like how many points earned in the standings, it's a little bit apples and oranges. And I suppose you could make the same argument with McDavid. I think his numbers, like we're used to it in a way, like we're almost like dull to it, but it's nuts. Like Sidney Crosby's best individual season is 120 points, and McDavid has 30 more than that right now. Like it's like, think how many like fourth liners out there, like 30 points is a great year for them. He's got a fourth liners equivalent season above Sidney Crosby's best season. It's hard for me to put my brain around.
He's almost, if he hasn't, I mean,
I think the Oilers are going to the Cup final, by the way.
Okay. So that's one half of your Cup prediction.
I don't know if they're winning it, but I am calling Edmonton getting out of the Western Conference in the playoffs.
Okay, so hold on to that, because this time next week, we're going to want your full Cup prediction. So hold back on who your East pick is.
But I'm just saying, like, I think McDavid, like, I think it's that special. And I know you would have the natural questions. What about Stuart Skinner? We haven't seen him play. Like, there's no guarantees in life or in best 4 to 7 playoff series in hockey. but I really think the Oilers got it going on this year.
Hey, look, I think there's a lot of people in Edmonton who would love to hear that. They would love to see Connor McDavid. I mean, at this point, that's the one thing he needs, because he's going to win the Hart this year. He has all these other different individual accolades. He's climbing up these point totals. What does that mean to him if he doesn't have a ring, at least one ring on his finger? This is the one thing he needs.
It's true, but I've thought about this a lot. In a league with 32 teams now, like, we might have to revisit how we feel about careers that don't include a ring, because there's just not enough rings to go around. And anyway, you're right, though. For him, he needs it, like, in his mind. Like, don't get me wrong, and it's way too premature to have this discussion about him, because he's got 10 years after this. I mean, he's still got more chances, but we're going to see that the reality is, whether it's Connor McDavid or someone else, we're going to see more and more truly great careers not include a championship, just because, it was a 20 team or 21 team NHL when Gretzky and Lemieux were around winning their first rings, right? Like, adding 11 more teams changes the dynamic. And there's a lot of guys out there that I just don't think are going to get one that everything else about their resume will be sparkling. So,
I mean, aren't we already in that era already? I mean, we're just coming off a Hall of Fame class where the Sedin twins got in, Daniel Alfredson got in, Roberto Luongo got in. How many Stanley Cup rings do all of those guys have?
I think it was the first class ever that included no Stanley Cup rings, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think we're already at that point because of all those teams and because of the impetus put on international success too, right? Like, you could be a guy like Carey Price who, maybe you don't have the Stanley Cup success, but you have the individual success in the NHL, and you prove to be a baller on the international stage. If you're able to do that, like, nothing wrong with your career, especially if at the end of the day you could be considered a Hall of Famer. Absolutely.
Right, but Connor McDavid hasn't even basically had a chance to play internationally. I mean, I know the World Hockey. Anyway, let's not go down this. We've been on this topics, but you know what I mean? Like, yes. It's such a weird. That's why I'm hoping. I'm actually hoping that at least more players go to the World Hockey Championship. In the meantime, like, in the absence of best on best, that's the best we have at the senior level of men's, international hockey. So maybe there'll be more and more players going over in May from the North American countries that don't always, eagerly go over to that tournament.
Right. I hope so too. Before we get to Ask CJ, Matthew Knies over the weekend signing a 3-year entry-level contract. Did you see the ending of that Quinnipiac Minnesota game, by the way? Insanity.
Well, you only needed 10 seconds, so
you only needed 10 seconds.
It's truly it's an Instagram clip. You could watch all of overtime on one IG clip. It was crazy the way it went down too. Like, it was the puck was pinballing, like, people were falling, referees getting taken out. Like, it was just a wild ending.
Yard sale.
I didn't actually get to see that game. It wasn't available where I was, so I didn't watch the game itself on Saturday, but I did see that overtime.
Man,
good for Quinnipiac. Like, they weren't expected to do that, right?
Yeah, that's true. Getting the better of Matthew Knies and the Gophers in that final. But now Matthew Knies is a member of the Toronto Maple Leafs. Everyone was wondering when he'd sign. Everyone was wondering when that contract was coming. And now people are going to be like, oh, well, are we going to see him in the lineup? I mean, the Leafs are already in the playoffs. What's going to happen? Like, what can you tell us about what the Leafs could do with their newest prospect?
Well, I think if we actually rewind to the weekend, it tells us a lot about how they feel about Matthew Knies, that they were willing to go, have a game on Saturday night where they had a university goaltender, Jet Alexander, backing up Ilya Samsonov for their game against Montreal. Now, obviously, it wasn't a game that mattered in the standings. The Leafs had clinched home ice by that point. So winning or losing didn't affect it. But still, they had to jump through some salary cap-related hoops to spare everyone all the gory details. It's basically because Matt Murray got injured. It complicated the Leafs' road to being able to sign Matthew Knies, but they created emergency conditions essentially by having a university goaltender in there. And, now they're able to call up Joseph Wall and sign Knies. I think if you go to that trouble essentially to get Knies into, one or all of these remaining 3 regular season games on your schedule, you're doing it with the idea he might be playing games beyond that point. And, I think it's impossible to say. I'd say it's unlikely he's playing game 1 of the playoffs, but there could be injuries too. If there's one injury at the forward group, I would say it's likely he would be in. Like, I think he's probably their 13th forward right now, on the depth chart. And then some of it's going to be how he looks this week when he plays his first NHL games. But there's definitely a world where this guy's playing for the Leafs this playoffs. Like, I think that, they're making this signing. They are excited about Matthew Knies the next number of seasons, right? Like, the signing it's really to entice him to jump out of college now, to turn pro, and to be, an option for them next year on an entry-level deal, and 2 years from now on an entry-level deal. Like, I think you're going to see him assume a more prominent place in the roster and the lineup over those couple seasons. But in the short term, he's more insurance against injury or performance-related issues. And I think it's completely possible that, he's not just making his NHL debut in the next week or two. He's also playing his first Stanley Cup playoff games. And we've seen, everyone from Charlie McAvoy do that. Cole Caulfield got into that Canadiens run to the Cup final after playing 10 or 12 games at the end of the regular season. I mean, it's not completely unprecedented. And I think it makes a lot of sense. I mean, the Leafs even put Nick Robertson right into playoff games from the Ontario Hockey League during the COVID bubble back in 2020. So Sheldon Keefe has shown a willingness to do this in the past. And, I think the Leafs are in a pretty good spot right now with their forward group. Like, I don't see a place in the lineup where I'm like, he has to be there, but I think he's an option. And, that's probably why Leaf fans are so excited, right? It's sort of a shiny new toy. And the organization has had the same core now for a number of seasons. The Leafs haven't been having highly ranked picks to put into their lineup quite as much because, they've been trading those draft picks for going all in at the deadline. So, this is it's a unique kind of set of circumstances for Knies, and let's see how he does this week first before we're handicapping where he's playing, come the series with the Lightning.
Exactly. And of course, next week, in anticipation of the playoffs, we will have all of the thoughts we could possibly muster up about a Leafs Lightning series, as well as all the other series that could happen in this year's first round of the Stanley Cup playoffs. I can't wait. I can't wait.
So close. I mean, when we're doing next Monday's episode, that will be the first day of the playoffs. Like, think of
exciting.
Think of the feeling that'll be in the air that day. Like when we're recording this episode, a week from now. It's awesome.
It's about that time for Ask CJ. Let's get some questions in. Are you ready to take in some questions from the listeners, the viewers?
Absolutely. What do the people want to know?
From the High Sticking Podcast, let's start with them. I think Ken Holland should be nominated for GM of the Year. Might not win, but he deserves a few votes, not only for the moves he made, but also for the ones he did not make. I thought this was more of a question, it's more of a take, but I guess he kind of wants to know who you think might end up being GM of the Year.
Well, GM of the Year is one of the weirdest awards the NHL does because it gets voted on after the second round of the playoffs. So at that point, there's 4 teams remaining. And so obviously 4 GMs have put those 4 teams together. And so 3 of the 4 finalists inevitably are from those remaining 4 teams. So tell me or not 100% if the Oilers get to the third round again, well, then I would say he's likely to be there. I think if we're making the vote now, though, he certainly has a case. It's hard for me to imagine either with Coach of the Year or GM of the Year that you're going outside of Boston. I mean, this isn't just like, look how much better they are than the other teams, right? It's not just that they set a record this year. They are miles ahead of everybody in the entire league. And so I think that for me, Jim Montgomery in his first year behind the bench for the Bruins should be the Coach of the Year. And I think Don Sweeney, even for having the guts to make that coaching change, because if you remember, Julian, back when that happened, I was stunned to see Bruce Cassidy fired. He coached the Bruins to the playoffs in 6 straight seasons during his time there. So I know that they hadn't won a Stanley Cup and gotten over the hump, but we're not talking about a coach who was badly failing or had clearly lost the room. But I think even on the strength of that move, not to mention, some of the things he did in the offseason and even at the trade deadline, getting Orlov, Hathaway, Tyler Bertuzzi, and the Bruins just rolling through everybody. I mean, if those guys don't win those awards, I feel like something's wrong. Just
here's the thing, though. So first off, my bad on the reading of the question. The first line that for whatever reason I didn't copy to my notes. Who are your candidates for GM of the year and Coach of the year? So you actually answered the second part of that question too with Jim Montgomery. I don't have a problem if Jim Montgomery wins. I have a bit of an issue. If Don Sweeney wins for GM of the year because
you're
good.
You're going to bring up Mitchell Miller, right?
Well, yes, I have. What? Hold on a second.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. I have a big problem if Don Sweeney and the Bruins win GM of the year, knowing they had one of the bigger scandals of this season, one of the biggest missteps. That would be a massive mistake. I understand where you're coming from. They built a team that will go down as one of the greatest regular season teams, if not the greatest regular season team of all time. But I have a hard time with them making that decision and not going about due diligence properly and then being like, all right, congratulations, you're GM of the year. That's just my take, but like I have a hard time giving them the win.
It'll be I hadn't, when I was going through that, I wasn't thinking of that, obviously. But in terms of building a team, like it's hard to question it, right? I don't know and honestly, I don't know what the criteria is. I don't vote on GM of the year. I don't know like if there's a like, are you just saying like the person who did their job the best, whatever it is? But yeah, it's who would you vote then? Like who's the next best GM?
It's a great question, I guess. I mean, if you're saying the Oilers could go to the Cup final this year, I mean, doesn't that, I get why Ken Holland would get some votes for that, right? I guess for making some decent moves at the deadline and actually building a team that could actually go to the final and go beyond its potential.
I mean, Tom Fitzgerald, New Jersey's, probably they've arrived here at a moment a year quicker than I think they would have thought.
Absolutely.
I mean, but there's not. It's hard.
Ron Francis in Seattle, does he not get consideration? This is a team that's also ahead of schedule,
right? Well, and Dave Haxtell is coach. Honestly,
yes.
But yeah, I don't vote on either award, so I don't. They don't give me a say anyway. Neither will you. But well, it's the truth, right? I'm pretty sure the GMs vote for their own peer, if I'm not mistaken.
The players on the Ted Lindsay, I guess. So it's not.
Yeah. I actually don't have a problem with that, but it's a newer award, right? It's been around the last 10 or 15 years, say, and the fact they do it after the second round of the playoffs, I just think looks odd. Like to me, you either do it after the Cup final, but then I mean, the GM of the year is the guy who gets to lift the cup anyway.
Yeah, that's true.
You know what I mean? Like that is the person who objectively has achieved like what the point of their job is. Or you do it after the regular season, like all the other awards, and you just live with the fact that you're voting on the regular season, and you might be giving the GM of the year to someone whose team gets upset in round one. I mean, it just might be how it goes.
Yeah. All right. Thank you for the question, High Sticking Podcast. Ectoplasm 97. I'm sure there's been lots of instances where you've been called and told you needed to travel at the last second for work. What's your best story of one of these times where you needed to scramble?
I don't know if there's a best story. There's like a few weird ones that jump to mind. There was a time where I had gone to Winnipeg and I covered a Jets Leafs game in Winnipeg. I literally flew home and was at the grocery store like the same day I flew home, like buying groceries. And my boss phoned me and he's like, I need you to go to Winnipeg because there was an outdoor game there and the person that was supposed to go had fallen ill or something. And so like I literally just went back on a plane and flew right back to Winnipeg.
Whoa, that's weird.
Where I had just been. Like it was just like strange. And Winnipeg's a good 2.5 hour whatever flight from Toronto, maybe 3 hours. It was like a lot of back and forth. Another one that comes to mind is I was in Scotland a few years ago on vacation in the summer, and it was like the day I was flying home. It's sort of similar kind of story. And my boss phoned and he's like, I need you to go to the NHL's European player media tour in Stockholm in like 4 days. And so that was pretty short notice. I can't remember why I would be thrown into that so last minute, but I literally like flew all the way home from Scotland and basically got on a plane and flew right back to Europe because there was no way. It was so late. I couldn't change my plans to just stay there. Like whatever complications there were. So those are like the ones that jump to mind. I mean, most of the time, obviously when travel is kind of up in the air, it's the stuff that we've talked about before, Julian, like you're covering a playoff series. It's like, if this team wins the Stanley Cup tonight, I'm flying home tomorrow. Or if not, I'm flying back to this city. And, there's been a bunch of those over the years. The one cup final, New Jersey, LA, the Kings went up 3-0 and looked like they were going to sweep. And then New Jersey won 2 more games. So that necessitated like 3 more cross continent flights. Like that can be a lot. That can be a lot at times, especially again, I'm never getting that situation. It wasn't like I was a Kings fan, but, I can't remember what's going on that summer, but there's like a reason I wanted to get home. And, it's just like, it's a lot more air miles and all that stuff. But, the travel side, I'll say this, the travel side of the job is something I've like truly loved. I've always had kind of a wanderlust. I went and lived in London, England, the year I graduated from university. I always traveled a lot on my own time, even when, I was young and didn't have any money. Like I would basically whatever discretionary income I had, I was always spending on things like travel versus like buying nice clothes or anything like that. And so like, I really have enjoyed that part of the job. I travel a lot less now, and that's to my liking because I'm getting older and I've done a lot of that. But, I don't know if any of these are like great travel stories, but pretty much any time where I was like just in a place, had to fly home and then fly right back there. That Winnipeg one, I remember how hilarious it was. Like I actually thought my boss, I thought it was like a joke, right? Because he had obviously known I was just back from Winnipeg. And he's like, I need you to go right back to Winnipeg.
Saying back to Winnipeg reminds me of that Simpsons episode where you watch The Simpsons?
Oh yeah. I mean, I used to watch it as a kid a lot.
There's like a random like scene where like these kids are driving, like, no, this family's like driving down this road. Is this one episode where like Bart and Milhouse and I'm trying to remember the 2 other kids, but Nelson's in the car. They basically hijack a car and they're like driving cross country and they're driving alongside this other car. And like this dad is completely like, like he's completely on it. Like he's getting annoyed by his kids. And then Nelson sticks his head out of the car and then smacks the dad in the head. And then the dad's like, that's it. Back to Winnipeg. And then they turn around and drive. Oh, you probably remember that one.
I do. I actually just thought of another story that might fit the bill a little better. So
perfect.
The Leafs Capital series in 2017, I guess that was. There was a group of us trying to fly down to Washington for Game 5 of that series, and it was a lot of the I was working at Sportsnet at the time, and a lot of the technical people responsible for making the broadcast get to air were all on the same flight as me. And it was one of those days we got to Pearson in Toronto, and just like every flight on the Eastern Seaboard was like canceled, like everything. Like there was no way, like you couldn't fly to say Philly and do whatever. And to be honest, like if it was just me, I probably just wouldn't have went to that game because like, what can you do? And the world would keep spinning. But there was a number of people that work for Sportsnet that were camera operators or did other aspects of the show that were like needed to have a broadcast. And so they, at the last second, they literally rented a bus, and like 12 or 15 people and I were on a bus. We drove through the night.
Oh my God.
And they literally dropped us off at the morning skate. Like we drove all night and got dropped off at the arena for the morning skate. Obviously, eventually went and checked into the hotel after doing whatever work we had that morning, catching a quick nap and then covering that game. Like that was one of the weirder, kind of crazier travel moments in my career. And as I say, like let's face it, the Leafs and Capitals could play without CJ there. I could have watched it on TV and written something or whatever, but that was kind of fun.
That's a wild story. It drove in the middle of the night.
Well, I mean, it's an 8-hour drive to Washington in a car from Toronto, and I think a bus probably goes a little slower. So I don't know if it was 9 or 10 hours or what, but you tried to sleep where you could. I remember we stopped at like the duty free. That's the other thing. None of us had really eaten because we were all at the airport intending to fly, and we were just like getting like junk, like whatever you could buy. It was, I mean, not always the healthiest living when you're traveling through the grind, you know?
That's true. That's true. I got another one from Congo Red, and I'm very intrigued at the answer you'll give for this one. Okay. With some famous players like Tom Brady and LeBron James, the public knows more personal things like their favorite foods, their social circle, etc. Who do you think is the hockey player we know the most about? I think I know what the answer is, but I also wonder if Congo Red wants an answer of an active player and not just like someone who was once a player.
I mean, I'm almost inclined to say Wayne Gretzky.
Do we know the most about? Interesting. Well, I mean,
you have to be of a certain age. Like if you're, he by far, he had more exposure than any hockey player, even still today, I think. Like just the number of campaigns he did. He literally had, like, when he and Janet got married, he had like a royal wedding. Like it was like live on TV. And, you know, his mom and dad, like I'd say like Walter Gretzky, literally, again, you have to be of my generation to know this, but he was like interviewed widely. Like Wayne Gretzky's father was famous in Canada. Like,
yeah, it's like a big deal. Like I know about some of those interviews too. He's like the hockey dad.
Right. So like, I feel like in terms of just, and he was in the spotlight from the time he was 8 years old, and he's still to a degree in the spotlight, right? Like, so I was feeling like but in terms of who we know the most about, like, what are you thinking? Like, are you talking about someone who shares the most details on Twitter and stuff, or on IG, or?
Yeah, I thought more because my answer would have been PK Subban because of the photos he puts up of him with his circle. Right. Remember when he was dating Lindsey Vonn for all that time? Like, we knew about that. I don't know who he's dating now, if he is, but like him and Lindsey Vonn, that was like a thing. But like, to your point, like Wayne Gretzky, a few weeks ago, the debate was, okay, which NHL player do you think would best host SNL? Wasn't Wayne Gretzky on SNL a couple years ago? He hosted SNL like years ago.
Yeah, he did. And PK is probably a good answer, actually, when I think about it. But, you know, hockey players in general don't share. They're not, you know, there is a type. I don't want to broadly say that every hockey player is the same, but like hockey players generally are kind of low key and don't get into that stuff. I mean, that's the truth. I mean, this next generation, though, we've talked about, like they are open. I just think some of them are so young, they haven't had a life yet to share exactly everything. But
that's true. But like, I don't know. I'm optimistic too, that I think more and more of those kids are, I don't know, maybe they see what's going on in some of the other leagues that they've been following and they see how they go about it. So they kind of take after that. Like, I know I mentioned the NBA and how players are like one tweet that was buzzing in my head. So there was a game involving the Minnesota Timberwolves, and Rudy Gobert got himself into an altercation with one of his teammates on the bench. And Draymond Green like kind of subtweeted him like after the fact, which is funny because Rudy Gobert did the same to Draymond Green when he got into an altercation with a teammate Jordan Poole at the beginning of the year. Like, stuff like that is awesome. It's like, I mean, you know, some teams might not like it, but like, we love it.
I agree that it's hilarious, but we're not learning a lot about the individual there, other than maybe that they get a long memory or a sense of humor.
Actually, you know what? There's one final question. Final question for you. From Out Cold X, who could eat more poutine hot dogs, CJ, Julian, or Phil Kessel? You can already put me third on that list. So it's between you and Phil.
I'll call my own number. I think I can.
Oh, let's go. Yes.
Now, maybe it depends. Maybe in season, because Phil's doing so much cardio, maybe works up more of an appetite. But I think in general, I could probably do it. I'm not always the best at competitive eating, though. I'll say in general. Like, I still have a memory of watching the SDP guys do their hot dog eating contest during the pandemic, which was hilarious, but also like gross.
Yeah,
and I love hot dogs, but like the idea of getting to like 12 or 13 or what, I don't even know what number they got to, but it looked uncomfortable. Like Adam Wilde particularly looked visibly uncomfortable, like while doing it.
Yeah, well, maybe we can up the ante with those guys and have them eating poutine hot dogs. Also, Gary Lawless in Las Vegas. Let's set that up. Johnston versus Kessel this summer, coming to a stream near you.
I don't think there's no upside for Phil to even think about that.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. But there's.
Hey, did you hear? I'm going to I'm going on the SDP on Friday.
Oh,
getting my first look at the new studio. So.
Okay, I thought you were only supposed to go on after the Leafs lose in the playoffs.
No, that's become a tradition. Like, kind of, we do like the postmortem. But I haven't been on as much because obviously we have our own show now. But back in the day, I'd go on, 3 or 4 times a season or whatever, just basically whenever they asked. So it's really just a chance for me to see the studio and see the guys who I haven't seen in a long time. But then Adam's like, why don't you just come on the pod? And I was like, all right, let's go.
By the way, when I say, aren't you only supposed to be on when the Leafs lose? That is not a shot. That is what the tradition is. I'm not making a joke. I just want that clear.
I think I've done it 5 or 6 seasons in a row, like within a day or two of their last game. So,
some people might take it as me being salty, though.
Should they win a Stanley Cup, I think we'll also do some kind of postmortem too. So it's not contingent on them losing. It's basically when the season's done, looking forward to the off season, what's going to happen. So.
Exactly. So all the more reason to look forward to Friday's show. CJ, you heard it here first. I don't think it's been put out anywhere. So
I don't even know if I'm allowed to say it, but I mean, it's my life and I'm going to do it. So why can't I? Well, the Chris Johnston Show. You want to know what I'm doing this week, Julian? Friday at 11 a.m. I'm going to see the boys.
Okay. Take photo. I mean, we've seen the studio enough times on episodes, but take photos. Enjoy it. I hope to visit the studio at some point myself.
I actually wish I hadn't just worn the Juggernaut shirt here. It would have been funnier had I just turned up with it there and like I hadn't been seen in it in a couple of years. I'm gonna have to think of what I'm gonna wear that day. But
I still think you should just wear it.
I've got a Steve Dangle t-shirt too.
Yeah.
With Steve's face on it. I don't know. Maybe I'll find something fun.
Siege, this episode has been fun. Episode 153 of the Chris Johnston Show. We'll be back on Thursday with Stick Taps, and maybe the playoff picture will be a little bit more clear by then. Maybe not. Well, probably more the former than the latter, but you get what I mean. Keep it locked here for more great content at the SDPN as well. Check out some of the other podcasts as well. And we'll be back on Thursday with a new episode. For CJ, I'm Julian. So long, and peace.
And shout out to our 100%ers, Julian.
Shout out the 100%ers. Yes, sir. Shout out to the 100%ers, baby.
The Chris Johnston Show.
Powered by Sports Interaction. Want to bet?
Inside the Game, twice a week. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris. And follow Julian McKenzie @JKMcKenzie.
The Chris Johnston Show.